Rev up your engine! Okay, we got a used Prius here. The guy bought it for $8 grand with about 87,000 miles. Now he's got over 140, so he's gotten 50-something thousand miles out of it so far, and he hasn't had any real problems, other than now it jolts when it turns the engine back on from running from the electric motor and battery, and it idles a little shaky. He parked under a tree at an Airbnb, so be wary of Airbnbs that have birds that crap in them. Still got the original battery in it, and he notices his mileage is a little down from what it used to be because obviously the battery is worn. Since it's got 141,000 miles on it, it's now 13 years old. But it was made in Japan. Now, he rented a new Corolla that was made in Mississippi the other day, and he said it was nothing to this car. Made in Mississippi versus made in Japan. There is a difference. Don't let people BS you that they're all the same. They are not. The advantage of a Japanese car is it was not just built in Japan, motors and battery pack and all that stuff, but it was put together by Japanese. And there is a difference. You haven't seen my video that I made the other day about the guy who used to work for Toyota, who had a 2017 Toyota Tacoma and the white paint was coming off of it, put together and painted in Mexico, and they did a lousy job painting and the paint was coming off of it. So there is a difference. You get a made in Japan vehicle, it's going to be better quality. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Now he's smart. He changes the oil every 7,000 to 10,000 miles with full synthetic oil, so he doesn't have any head gasket problems in the regular gasoline engine. He is an Uber driver. Now, these things actually make a lot of sense for an Uber driver. When I go to Seattle and do internet business stuff there, invariably I'm riding around in Prius Ubers. They all have them because it's so much better gas mileage, stop and go. That's what these things are made for. They're not made for highway cruising because they're not using the electrical portion of it hardly at all, except when you accelerate. They're made for stop and go traffic. It makes sense. You actually make much more money on an Uber. You're spending a lot less money on gasoline. Okay, average is about 50 miles a gallon in the city. Imagine this scenario. I've seen guys driving Uber with a Suburban in town. That thing gets less than 10 miles a gallon. So this thing gets 5 times better gas mileage, and that certainly hits the bottom line if you're going to be an Uber driver. So as far as it stands for him, he's making good money on the deal because he only paid $8,000 for a car. Consider that this car was 25 grand to start off with. He got it for 8, and that includes taxes and everything, he said, so that was a good deal. 50,000 something miles on it. Hasn't put any real money into the thing. He's coming out pretty good. But always be warned, they're very complex cars. This thing's having a clunky, stally issue, so let's get out the big computer. Now while we're getting ready, here's a bit of humor. Irony too. Electric hybrid Prius, right? But it's got a hand seat that you gotta pull a lever on. We'll turn the idiot lights on. Intelligent diagnosis. And while we're waiting for the machine to do its job, realize you can't work on one of these Priuses without a fancy computer like this. I mean, you can change spark plugs, brake pads, crap like that. But diagnosis, you gotta have a machine like this. Because look at all the stuff going through all these different modules. Everything's green or gray. Gray just means it's not equipped. So there's no kinds of codes or anything, so we'll go into the main computer system. Now realize that this car is no different than any other in terms of the computer setup. If data is plus or minus 20%, it's going to trip a trouble code. There's no trouble codes because the problem is less than 20%. Humans can feel things that the computer doesn't care about, mainly because the computer's programmed that way. If they program the computers to do 1 or 2 or 3%, your check engine light would be coming on all the time. And that's one of the reasons that it's set up the way that it is. So if you ever go to a mechanic and they say, well, the check engine light's not on, there's no trouble codes, we can't find out what's wrong, go to another mechanic. That's not where you end, that's only where you begin. So we'll look at some of the special functions we can do. Yeah, there's nothing there that we need to mess with. We'll look at the actuator tests that we can do. If necessary, we can do all these tests, but it would be wild guessing to start there. So instead, we'll go back to data stream. We selected them all, and guess what? It's time for a road trip. We'll record what's happening, see when it acts up, then we'll analyze the data. And off we go. It's running on the battery now. Let's give it some gas. There goes the engine. We'll give it a good road test. Now, being low to the ground, these things do handle quite well. The main reason they're low to the ground, though, is because then they have less coefficient of drag and they're more efficient. That's how it can get 50 miles a gallon driving around in stop-and-go traffic. Okay, now the engine's shut off. We're going to see what happens when we take off. it kicked in, and it wasn't too bad. It didn't clunk yet. That's just normal. Okay, now it's off. So we're gonna put the AC on, and we'll sit here until it turns itself back on. It can only run so long with the AC on without turning itself on. Here we go. It really wasn't that bad. A little jiggle, but not much. It kicked in, it didn't really jiggle. A lot of people poo-poo the Priuses. They say, they're so slow. They don't get out of their own way, but that's not exactly the truth. Here we're stopped with the engines not on. Let's floor it and see what happens. You can see, it's not that slow. When you have the electric motor and the gasoline motor combining, it's got a reasonable amount of torque. And if you're just cruising down the road, you get a battery boost when you floor it. See? It's not all that bad. Now, the computer hasn't found any real faults, and so far electronically, I haven't either. It hasn't really done that much of a jiggle. So let's go back and look at the physical, mechanical parts. You can see with the age that it has on it, the battery isn't charging up all that much. You can see the battery has a very low charge, even though it's being driven around. The lower the battery, the harder it's going to be for the thing to restart itself when it shuts off and turns itself back on again. Now, I notice I'm braking a lot, and the battery is charging up better here. You can see it's starting to get higher. But with its age, it's discharging the battery a lot faster than it would with a newer vehicle, because the battery's losing its level of efficiency. That's what happens with these hybrid cars. They get to be older like this, and basically it's a 12-year-old car, that the batteries will not hold the charge as long. They'll discharge faster. Okay, so we come to a stop. It's got a higher level of charge now. See if we get a little bump out of it. And we'll go up a hill. They don't like going uphill, of course. They're going to turn the motor on pretty quick. Well, that was a completely seamless transition. I didn't feel any bump at all. Realize it's got a regular motor too, and it has motor mounts. Could be a motor mount, a transmission mount starting to get a little weak. In the trunk, there's a small battery. We're gonna test that first. And there it is. The little bitty battery. We're gonna test this. Now this is a 410 cold cranking battery, so we're gonna test it with our little battery tester. Let's see what the little machine's gonna say. In vehicle, we want battery test. It's a regular flooded cold cranking amps. And it's 450, so we'll go down. And here we go. Replace battery. It's only got 342 left. Now, you might think, oh, it's got the gigantic, huge battery that's under there. But they also have a regular lead acid battery in these things. This one, even though it's only a year old, it's shocked. Now, he's an Uber driver. I see some of these things, the batteries get low because they don't use them enough. And that's the auxiliary battery. It just shows those tiny little batteries, they aren't that well made. And a lot of his problem can be because of that. Because when it's starting a vehicle over, could easily be that. It needs to be replaced anyways because it's too low. There's so much relationship in this car. The generator puts out all kinds of power. It's got to be stepped down to some voltage, stepped up to some voltage, and of course that little one is only a 12-volt battery. There's so much complexity in this thing. When you do test that, if it says replace battery, replace that first. That could fix all your problems. But we're going to test the motor mounts just in case. We'll go under the car, and we want to jack up. And as we jack, we see the car's going up in the air. The car's going up in the air. So is the motor and transmission. The body would stay down, and the motor would go up in the air. That's not the case. So there's nothing wrong with the mounts. We'll analyze the data anyways, as long as we took a road test. So I've got a think file here, and we'll go to Toyota Prius. It's all going to be hiding in there. And it'll be the first one that we did with all that data. And we can play it back. So we're going to look for odd data. Luckily, it's color coded. If there's something really wrong, it'll be in the red. Look at stuff in the graphic analysis. No bad data coming out there. No glitches. If we didn't miss anything, we'll go through all 15 pages of data. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and everything's still blue. So there's no bad data at all. Now, interestingly enough, his mother has an older Prius, an 05, which has had the main battery replaced with the remanufactured one. I'm not that big of a fan, but he says hers doesn't jiggle at all. It works perfectly. Well, she's got a fully charged hybrid battery. I don't know about the other battery. It's not here, so I can't test it. Now, we know his hybrid battery is warm. The age, the mileage. That could be part of it, but since the auxiliary battery says it should be replaced from the testing machine, he's going to replace it, and see if it helps with the jiggling. But my advice is if it doesn't help with the jiggling, live with the jiggling. Because eventually you'd have to replace that giant battery, and then he doesn't know if he wants to spend that kind of money or just go get another newer used Prius. Sometimes it's cheaper buying a car than it is buying a battery in these things. Well, I just got done talking to Toyota, and they do sell brand new ones, and they come down somewhat. Parts and labor, the battery without tax is like $3,500. It is a new battery. It's not a remanufactured one. But by the time you're done, you're going to pay close to $5 grand. And considering that he paid $8 grand for the whole car, and now it's getting higher mileage, he'd probably be better putting that money into another used Prius that has less miles. It has 80,000 miles or something, and then go from there. But of course, all that's debatable now, because he might be able to buy that little battery, and that could solve the whole thing. If it stops doing it, great. If not, the big giant battery, and he's still getting 50 miles a gallon in town, what the heck? I just drive it. It got a little jiggle to it. Personally, I have a lot of customers with these that they really jerk when they turn the engine back on, and the people have lived with it, and 5 years later, it still does the jerk when it turns the engine back on, but they still get 50 miles a gallon, so who cares? So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.